You have probably heard the words by now: somatic therapy, EMDR, breathwork, nervous system regulation. Maybe a friend mentioned it. Maybe you saw it on Instagram. Maybe your therapist or somebody else's therapist used one of those phrases and you nodded like you knew what it meant. And then you came home and quietly Googled it at 10 o'clock at night. And maybe you are also someone who loves Jesus, who prays, who believes that God is the ultimate healer, capital H. And you are not entirely sure what to do with the fact that healing sometimes looks like bilateral eye movement or controlled breathing or a therapist asking you to tap on your own collarbone. Is this okay? Is it biblical? Is it new age? Is it just a good science? And if it's science, whose science is it? And does that science belong to us? I have those questions. My clients have those questions. And today we're going to sit with them and answer them together. Welcome to Elisha Space, a sanctuary for healing growth and for the kind of honest conversations that actually change things. I'm Elisha, your host, a counselor, an author, and someone who has sat in the same stuck places you have. If you're new here, welcome home. You found this space for a reason, and I am glad you're here. If you have been listening for a while, I see you, and I'm glad that you're back. Today's episode is practical, clinical, but pastoral, and we are building a field guide, and I mean that literally. A field guide is what you carry with you when you go into unfamiliar territory. It names what you're looking at. It tells you whether it's safe to touch. It gives you context so that you do not have to be afraid of what you do not understand. That is what we are building today. We are going to walk through 7 specific somatic modalities: EMDR, breathwork, somatic experiencing, internal family systems, tension and trauma releasing exercises, emotional freedom technique, and the safe and sound protocol. And for each one, I am going to give you what it is, what it does in the nervous system, who it serves best, and how it integrates with a faith foundation that does not ask you to choose between your body and your God. So stay with me. Before we go into the modalities themselves, I want to name something. Somatic therapy is having a moment. That is not an overstatement. In 2026, searches for somatic healing and nervous system healing are at historic highs. The word somatic, which literally means relating to the body, has moved from clinical textbooks to mainstream conversation in a way that would have seemed extraordinary even 5 years ago. And the faith community is watching this with a complicated mix of curiosity and caution. I understand that caution, and I share some of it. Some of what is being marketed under the somatic umbrella is genuinely rooted in good neuroscience. Some of it has drifted into spiritual territory that is incompatible with a Christian worldview. And many approaches sit in a complicated middle space where the science is solid, but the language used to deliver it is borrowed from traditions that do not share our theological foundation. This is why I am building this guide as a practitioner who is also a woman of faith. Not to give you a green light on everything, not to give you a blanket red light either, but to give you enough understanding that you can evaluate each modality on its own merits, clinically and theologically, and make an informed choice. Because here is what I know. God made this body. He knit together the very nervous system that every one of these modalities is working with, and he is not absent from any room where genuine healing happens. but discernment still matters. And today we're going to do discernment together. Before we get to the specific modalities, let's get the foundation right because this word gets used loosely and clarity matters. Somatic comes from the Greek word soma, body. Somatic therapy is any therapeutic approach that explicitly incorporates the body's physical sensations, posture, movement, and physiological responses as part of the healing process. That distinguishes it from purely cognitive approaches like traditional talk therapy or CBT, where the primary work happens at the level of thoughts and beliefs. The research behind somatic approaches rests on a well established body of science. And I want to name three foundational figures whose work underpins almost everything we are going to discuss. Peter Levine, the developer of Somatic Experiencing, whose work on how animals complete the stress response in the wild became the basis for understanding how humans get stuck in incomplete survival responses. Bessel van der Kolk, whose landmark book, The Body Keeps the Score, which, if you haven't read it, I want you to write that down now, documented with clinical rigor how trauma is stored not primarily in narrative memory, but in the body itself. And Stephen Porges, the creator of polyvagal theory, whose mapping of the vagus nerve and its three states, ventral vagal safety, sympathetic activation, and dorsal vagal shutdown, has given every practitioner in this field a neurological map we did not have before. These three names are the scaffolding. Hold on to them. Now, let us build the guide. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. This is probably the modality you have heard the most about. It is also the one I get the most questions about from Christian clients and from listeners. Let me tell you exactly what it is. EMDR was developed in 1987 by psychologist Dr. Francine Shapiro, who made what she described as an accidental discovery that moving her eyes back and forth while processing a distressing thought caused the emotional charge of that thought to decrease. That observation led to decades of clinical research. And today, EMDR is one of the most thoroughly researched trauma treatments in the world. It is recognized as an evidence based treatment by the World Health Organization, the American Psychological Association, the Department of Veteran Affairs, and the Department of Defense. So, what is actually happening? When we experience something traumatic, whether that's a car accident, child abuse, a violent relationship, medical trauma, spiritual abuse, the brain's normal memory processing system gets overwhelmed. The hippocampus, which is responsible for filing memories into long-term storage, essentially drops the ball. The memory gets stored in a fragmented, unprocessed form with all of its original sensory detail, emotional charge, and body sensations intact. This is why trauma memories don't feel like memories the way a birthday party feels like a memory. They feel like right now because neurologically, they are still filed as a current threat. EMDR works by activating bilateral stimulation, typically through alternating eye movements, but also through tapping or alternating tones. While the client holds the traumatic memory in mind, this bilateral stimulation mimics what happens during REM sleep. When the brain naturally processes and consolidates the day's experiences under the activation of bilateral stimulation, the unprocessed memory begins to move through the brain's information processing system. The emotional charge reduces. The fragmented pieces integrate. The memory begins to feel like something that happened to you rather than something that is happening to you. That is not spiritual language, that is neuroscience. So, the faith integration question is EMDR compatible with Christian faith? Yes. And I want to be specific about why. EMDR does not introduce any spiritual content. It does not require you to visualize a particular figure, adopt a particular philosophy, or engage with any worldview other than your own. You bring your own cognitions, your own meaning making, your own God. In fact, many EMDR trained therapists, particularly those who work with faith communities, incorporate prayer and scriptural truth naturally into the EMDR protocol, the positive cognition phase of EMDR, where the client identifies a new adaptive belief to replace the trauma based belief, is a profound opportunity for scriptural integration. I am shameful becomes I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I am not safe becomes He is my refuge and my fortress. I am alone in this becomes I will never leave you nor forsake you. This protocol holds that space. You fill it with truth. Who is EMDR best for? Single incident trauma, car accidents, assaults, medical trauma, complex childhood trauma, grief, PTSD, performance anxiety, relational trauma, spiritual abuse. One important note: EMDR is not a do it yourself protocol. It requires a trained clinician. If you are looking for an EMDR therapist, the EMDRIA website, that is the EMDR International Association, has a therapist locator. Questions to ask a potential EMDR therapist are: one, are you EMDRIA certified or have you completed EMDRIA approved training? Two, are you familiar with working with clients who integrate faith as part of their healing? Three, how do you handle spiritual content that comes up during processing? Those three questions will tell you a great deal. The word breathwork covers a lot of ground, and this is one area where discernment is genuinely important because not all breathwork is created equal. Let me distinguish between what I would call clinical breath work, breathing techniques grounded in respiratory physiology, and spiritual breath work, which is where we need to tread more carefully. Clinical breath work, the category we're going to focus on today, includes the physiological side. This is the most accessible and the most immediately effective breathwork technique I know. It consists of a double inhale through the nose, a full breath followed immediately by a second short sniff to the top of the lungs, followed by a long, slow, complete exhale through the mouth. The mechanism is elegant. When we sigh, we re-inflate the alveoli, the tiny air sacs in the lungs that collapse under stress. The long exhale activates the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system by lengthening the out breath relative to the in breath, which slows the heart rate and signals to the body you are safe. One physiological sigh, that is all. The research from Andrew Huberman's lab at Stanford shows that one physiological sigh can produce a measurable reduction in physiological stress markers within 30 seconds. Let's do that right now together. Double inhale through your nose and a long exhale through your mouth. Do you feel that? That is your parasympathetic nervous system engaging. That is not narcissism. That is physiology. And that physiology was designed by the God who made the breath in the first place. Box breathing. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out, 4 counts hold. This is the technique used by Navy SEALs to remain operational under extreme stress. And it works by creating a rhythmic cadence that pulls the nervous system out of reactive mode and into regulated mode through the predictability of the breath pattern itself. Coherent breathing, also called resonance frequency breathing. This involves breathing at approximately 5 to 6 breaths per minute, far slower than the average adult breath rate of 12 to 20 breaths per minute. At this rate, the heart rate variably, which is the variably between heartbeats and a key marker of nervous system flexibility, reaches its peak. This technique has the most research behind it for anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Now, where do we need discernment? Holotropic breathwork and other hyperventilation-based techniques that induce altered states. These were developed by psychiatrist Stanislav Grof as a replacement for LSD-assisted therapy, which tells you something about their design intent. The altered states they produce can be psychologically disabling, and they are frequently paired with spiritual frameworks that are not Christian. My posture is this: clinical breathwork, yes. Hyperventilation based altered state breathwork, proceed with significant caution and theological awareness. And here's the faith integration. Genesis 2:7. Then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. The very mechanism by which breath regulates the nervous system. The long exhale that tells the body it is safe is the same mechanism by which God first animated the human body. Breath is not a neutral biological function. In Hebrew, the word raush, spirit, wind, breath, is the same word. The act of conscious, regulated breathing is an act of reconnecting to the body that God breathed into existence. That is not New Age theology. That is the book of Genesis. Somatic experiencing was developed by Dr. Peter Levine, and it is, in many ways, the foundational model that much of modern somatic therapy is built upon. Levine observed that animals in the wild, prey animals especially, deer and zebras and rabbits, routinely face life-threatening predators. They go into freeze or collapse, and then, when the threat passes, they do something that humans almost never do. They shake, a trembling, involuntary, full-body discharge of the accumulated survival energy. And then they walk away. They do not carry the trauma forward because they completed the physiological cycle. Humans interrupt the process through social conditioning, through shame, stop crying, you're fine, those kinds of statements, through the cognitive override of prefrontal cortex that tells us to manage our responses. And the incomplete survival energy remains stored in the body as tension, hypervigilance, chronic pain, numbness, and disease. Somatic experiencing works to complete that cycle slowly, safely, titrated, by helping clients track body sensations, pendulate between activation and resource, and discharge stored energy in small, manageable doses. Here are some key concepts. Titration is the clinical term for approaching trauma in tiny increments rather than flooding. SE therapists are trained to keep clients in what they call the window of tolerance, not too activated, not too shut down. Pendulation, that is the movement between activated sensation and resource sensation, between the place that holds the trauma and the place in the body that still feels okay. Discharge. This term refers to the somatic release of stored survival energy, which may look like trembling, tears, heat, yawning, spontaneous movement, or deep sighing. Now, here is the faith integration. Psalms 139 tells us that God knit together our inward parts. The Hebrew is kilyah, the kidneys used idiomatically for the deepest internal organs. He wove us together in the womb. He is intimately acquainted with every sensation in this body. The somatic experiencing premise is that the body holds what the mind has not been able to integrate. Now, this is not a secular discovery that threatens biblical anthropology. It is a clinical observation that deepens our understanding of how fearfully and wonderfully made we truly are. And who is SE best for? Complex developmental trauma, early attachment wounds, chronic pain and illness with a trauma component, clients who disassociate in traditional talk therapy, pre-verbal trauma where narrative is unavailable. And this is where I want to slow down, because now we're going to discuss internal family systems, or IFS. This is a modality that Christians encounter frequently and often have the most questions about. IFS was developed by Dr. Richard Schwartz in the 1980s, and the core premise is this: the mind is not a single unified entity. It is a system of parts, subpersonalities that developed as adaptive responses to difficult experiences. Schwartz identifies three categories. Exiles are the wounded parts that carry the pain of early experience, and that has been banished from consciousness because they feel too overwhelming. Managers are protective parts that run the show. They keep us productive and controlled and defended to prevent the exiles from flooding us. And then there are the firefighters, reactive parts that come in when managers fail, often through impulsive, numbing, or self-destructive behaviors. And at the center of this system, IFS proposes what Schwartz calls the self. The self is a core of innate curiosity, calm, compassion, creativity, courage, clarity, connectedness, and confidence that is never damaged by trauma, that can't be destroyed, that is always present even when the parts have taken over. Now, here is where faith integration requires specific navigation. The language of self in IFS is not theologically identical to the Christian concept of the soul or the regenerate self. Schwartz has described the self in spiritual terms that are influenced by both Buddhist and New Age frameworks in some of his writing. However, and this part is really important, the clinical model of IFS is separable from Schwartz's personal metaphysics. A faith-informed clinician using IFS can, and many do, understand the part system as the complex, fragmented way trauma distorts the image of God in us, and the movement towards integration as the process by which the spirit restores what trauma broke. The self-capacity in IFS, that calm, compassionate inner witness, can be understood theologically as the indwelling presence of Christ that trauma has made inaccessible, not as a replacement for Him. I use a gentle, modified IFS framework in my own clinical work, and I am transparent with clients about how I am integrating it theologically and how I am not. The questions I would ask a therapist before engaging with IFS is: one, do you use IFS as a pure framework, or have you integrated personal spiritual content into the model? Two, if you have a spiritual framework, what is it? And are you open to working within a Christian one? Three, how do you handle it when parts express beliefs that are theologically inconsistent with a client's faith? Now, these are not trick questions. They are professional questions. A good therapist will welcome them. And who is IFS best for? Dissociative presentations, eating disorders, addiction, shame-based trauma, religious trauma that has fragmented the person's sense of self and safety with God. Dr. David Berceli developed TRE, which stands for Tension and Trauma Releasing Exercises, after years of working with war trauma and natural disaster survivors in the Middle East and Africa. His observation, like Levine's, was that the body has a natural mechanism for releasing stress and trauma, neurogenic tremoring, that involuntary shaking we saw in the animals. TRE uses a specific sequence of 7 exercises to fatigue the iliopsoas muscle, the body's primary stress muscle, the one that contracts in the fetal position of a bomb shelter, until the nervous system initiates voluntary tremoring. The tremors look like vibrating. They begin in the legs and can move through the whole body. They are not seizure activity. They are the nervous system completing a discharge cycle. This is one of the most physiologically direct approaches available. No cognitive processing required, no narrative, no discussion of the traumatic content. The body does what it already knows how to do when we stop interrupting it. And here's the faith integration. Job 4:14. Fear and trembling seized me and made all my bones shake. The Hebrew literature is full of somatic responses in the presence of God, in the presence of overwhelming experience. Trembling in the Old Testament is not a malfunction. It is the body responding to something too large to process any other way. Berceli himself describes TRE as working with the body's innate wisdom. A Christian reads that as working with the way God designed his body to heal. Because he did not design us for the accumulation of stress we were never meant to carry forever. And who is TRE best for? Clients who are stuck in somatic numbness, chronic muscular tension, veterans, first responders, anyone who intellectualizes in therapy and needs a body first entry point. Now let's discuss EFT and tapping. EFT is emotional freedom technique, sometimes called tapping. Involves tapping on specific acupuncture meridian points on the body while verbally tuning into a distressing memory, emotion, or belief. Now, this was developed by Gary Craig in the 1990s, drawing on applied kinesiology and acupuncture traditions. The research base has grown significantly over the past decade. Multiple randomized control trials show EFT producing significant reductions in PTSD, anxiety, and depression, often in relatively few sessions. The mechanism appears to involve the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. Tapping on the body while holding the distress in mind sends calming proprioceptive signals to the amygdala simultaneously, essentially counter conditioning the threat response. The faith integration is, and the discernment to note here, is that EFT tools are rooted in traditional Chinese medicine's meridian systems and are worth naming honestly. The meridian framework is not a Christian framework. If a practitioner frames EFT in terms of energy fields, chi, or spiritual energy flow in ways that carry theological context, you are in a territory that warrants evaluation. However, the clinical evidence for EFT does not depend on the accuracy of meridian theory. The tapping appears to work through mechanisms that are entirely inexplainable through modern neuroscience. Somatosensory input disrupting the fear conditioning cycle. My position is that EFT as a clinical technique can be evaluated on its neurological merit. EFT that's wrapped up in energy healing spiritual framework. Apply your own theological discernment when that occurs. And who is EFT best for? Phobias, anxiety, single incident trauma, clients who do well with self-administered techniques between sessions, those who are drawn to somatic work but are not yet ready for deeper body-based processing. Now, let's discuss our seventh modality, the Safe and Sound Protocol, or SSP. This was developed by Dr. Stephen Porges as a direct application of his polyvagal theory. Polyvagal theory maps the autonomic nervous system and through three states: ventral vagal, safety and social engagement; sympathetic, this regulates fight or flight; and dorsal vagal. This is where we experience shutdown and freeze. The theory proposes that the nervous system evaluates safety through a process Porges calls neuroception, a below conscious scanning of environmental cues for safety or danger. And one of the most powerful cues the nervous system uses is the human voice, specifically the prosodic features of a safe human voice: warmth, rhythm, and melodic variation. The SSP is a filtered music protocol. About 5 hours of specifically filtered music designed to activate the neural circuits of the middle ear that evolved specifically to detect the frequencies of a safe human voice. Listening to SSP under clinical supervision exercises the neural pathways of the ventral vagal state. The effect for many clients is a marked increase in felt safety. The baseline felt sense that the world is tolerable, that connection is possible, that the body does not need to brace. And within our faith integration, we have John chapter 10, verse 27. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. The nervous system's deep responsiveness to voice, the fact that we are literally wired to regulate through the quality of a human voice. Well, this speaks to something profound about how God designed us for relationship, not just cognitive relationship, neurological, embodied, attunement-based relationship. The voice that speaks to the storm and says, "Peace, be still," is doing something that polyvagal theory can only partially map. The peace that surpasses understanding, Philippians 4:7, may surpass cognitive understanding precisely because it operates at the level of the body, the nervous system, the very architecture of felt safety that God designed and that Christ embodies perfectly. He is not just theologically safe, he is neurologically safe. He is the safe other that our ventral vagal system has been waiting for since the beginning of trauma. Before we close, I want to give you something to take with you. We have covered a lot of ground today, and information as important as it is, can itself become overwhelming. So let me bring the nervous system back into the room. I want you to put both feet on the floor if you're able. Feel the pressure of the ground beneath you, not metaphorically, literally, the weight of your body pressing down into something solid. That is ground. That is real. Now, place one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. Take a deep breath in through your nose and notice which hand moves first. Don't change it, just notice. And now, the physiological sigh, double inhale and a long, slow exhale. Let your jaw go soft. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears and let your nervous system hear this. You are not running from anything right now. You are here. You are present. You are safe in this moment. Knowledge isn't just power for trauma survivors. Knowledge is safety. You came into this episode with questions. My prayer is that you are leaving with a framework, not just information to carry, but a map that helps you walk through the territory without being afraid of what you do not understand. Your body is not your enemy. It is not the thing you need to overcome in order to be spiritual. It is the house God chose to inhabit. It is the temple the Spirit dwells in, and healing it, all of it, the cortex and the amygdala, the vagus nerve and the ellipses, the breath and the bilateral stimulation, is not a concession to secular psychology. It's stewardship of what is sacred. Let's pray. Father, I am grateful that you made these bodies, that you knit together the very nervous systems that we are learning to regulate, that you breathed the first breath into human nostrils and called it life. I am grateful that you are not threatened by the science that maps what you made. For everyone listening today who is overwhelmed, who has been carrying trauma in their body for years, maybe decades, who has been trying to heal it with willpower and faith declarations alone and cannot understand why it's not working, I ask you to meet them in the body, in the tightness in the chest, in the jaw that just won't unclench, and the stomach that braces before anything bad has even happened, and the hands that shake, and the shoulders that never come down. You see it all. You made it, and you are not asking them to transcend before you will love them, because you love them just as they are. For those who are afraid of these tools, afraid of getting it wrong, afraid of opening something they cannot close, afraid of what healing might ask of them, give them discernment that is rooted in peace, not in fear. Give them a practitioner that they can trust. Give them a community that does not require them to choose between their body and their faith. And for those who are practitioners, those who are counselors, therapists, coaches, pastors, and they are listening to this today, give us the humility to keep learning, the courage to sit with what we do not yet understand, and the grace to hold the clinical and the pastoral together without flattening either one. His peace is not dependent on your circumstances being resolved. It is a regulated nervous system and the presence of a safe God. Amen. Here's your challenge this week, and I want you to write this down. Each day for the next 7 days, I want you to choose one modality from this episode and spend 10 minutes learning about it. Day 1, read about EMDR. Go to the EMDR website. Look at what a session actually involves. Day 2, practice the physiological side 3 times today. Just 3. Notice what changes. And then day 3, read 1 chapter, just 1, of The Body Keeps the Score. And then day 4, find a somatic experiencing therapist directory online and just look. No commitment, just look. Day 5, try a single box breathing session. 4 counts in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. Try that for 5 minutes. Day 6, notice one moment today when your body gave you information before your mind caught up, and then write it down. Day 7, bring this episode to one person you know who is navigating trauma. Text it to them, just the link. That is enough. You are not building a new theology this week. You are building awareness of the body God gave you and the tools that exist to help it heal. And that is not a small thing. If this episode helped you, if you walked in with questions and you are now walking out with a little bit more clarity, a little more breath, a little more compassion for this body you live in, share it. Text it to one person you know is struggling. Leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. It is how we find each other, and it is how this conversation keeps going. You can find show notes, the full modality breakdown with resources, and links to everything we are discussing today at elishaspace.onpodium.com. And if you're ready to go deeper, if this conversation surfaced something in you that you know you need to work through with support, reach out. You don't have to navigate this alone. Until next time, you're not too much, you are not too far, and you are not alone.